Hi everyone, I'm Chanell J. Wilson, and today I just wanted to come on and talk about my experience watching the Quincy documentary on Netflix. So let's get started. I have a 4-year-old and he's in the room with us, and so you might hear him a little bit, but not to the point where you can't hear me. So we'll go ahead and get started. So overall, I really enjoyed the Netflix experience of Quincy's documentary. His daughter was a part of making it. She was one of the videographers. And overall, what I enjoyed about the Quincy Jones documentary was it gave you a good, hearty snapshot of his life, his artistry, his music, the things he overcame, the things he went through, even a little bit of his love life and how that and how his music impacted that. His relationship with his children, even talked a little bit about his mom too, and his relationship with his mom and how that impacted his work ethic later on. One thing that stood out to me was the snapshot and when it talked about poverty. And one thing that that really hit home for me was he talked about how him and his brother, they grew up in a very poor environment in Chicago, and they first lived with their mom, and then their mom had to go into a mental institution, and so their dad took care of them a little bit, and then he took them to their grandmother so that she could really help. And I could understand why he did that during that time frame. And one thing he said was his grandmother was a former slave, and that hit home. I was just like, whoa, like, wow, I wonder what that experience was like, for her to be a former slave and then to have experienced emancipation, but still kind of not be fully free in a society that oppressed her. So I can only imagine what that experience was like for her and for them growing up under her, and seeing the world through her eyes in those young years. One thing he mentioned was that she used to cook possum, whatever she could get her hands on. I'm believing around, this was like the Great Depression time, so whatever she could get her hands on, that's what she would cook to feed the family. And that just spoke to our society, our American experience, just some of the things we went through. And so it was like watching the documentary of his life, but then also getting a small taste of what life was like for Black people during that time in our American history. So it was one of those kind of pieces. And I like how they would show him talking, and then they would put a picture next to it to just give us that feel. When he got into music, he was, I believe, like 14, somewhere in there, he was young, but he was able to learn, I believe it was either the saxophone or the trumpet. I'm not sure which instrument right now because I watched it like a week ago, but that's where he mastered learning music, time, composition. And in that moment, that's when he figured out what he wanted to do. He wanted to make music, he wanted to record, and he really wanted to write and make arrangements. And so he set out and did that. Something in what used to hit me about that is that they would show pictures of him in his youth, and you would see him as the maestro with his stick, and he's going over everything in the notes, and then and he would explain how one time when he started working with Frank Sinatra, and Sinatra would say, okay, I like this part, but I don't, can you fix it? And he'd go right over and he scratch out and retranspose something else. It was just like, he's a true musician, a musician's musician. And, you know, for me, I'm 37, so my experience with Quincy Jones is more like the Michael Jackson years, The Wiz, Back on the Block, Q's Juke Joint. those are my experiences with Quincy Jones. So to see the parts of him that I wasn't able to see because I wasn't born yet, it was like putting the rest of the story together on who this master musician was and is, because he's still making music and still producing. Like, I always tell myself, I want to see my son, who is 4, when he's 50. That's going to put me in my 80s. So watching him in his documentary gave me a visual of what I'd like to see my life look like when I'm 80. Still up and running, still producing and doing music and having a team at my table working on stuff. Like they had a video part of that where they showed him in his living room and he had his team and they were putting together the Smithsonian presentation and they were getting everybody together, and I was like, look, this is just awesome. Now the parts that really were human that really hit me was how they talked about some of his health things, the health scares and the health ailments, and how many times he's almost passed away, and he was like, it's still not my time yet though. He overcame that. So that was really, really, really moving as well. One thing that really hit me about one of his health scares, when he had the aneurysm, he had 2 aneurysms. One where he passed out and they had to do surgery. And then the other one, they saw it and the doctor was like, we have to go back in. And they had to take the other one out. So he could not play his, I believe it was the trumpet again, or saxophone again. He couldn't play that instrument anymore because of that. And so he had to reinterpret certain things. He had to learn a lot of stuff all over again from having that surgery. My mom had a brain tumor, and I remember her recovery was really weird. You know, of course, because they cut you in places and you lose certain things. And so seeing him tell that story and how he overcame that, even his wife at the time, Peggy Lipton, talked about just how that time was like touch and go. It was just like we went from being happy, having a baby, to is he gonna be here, and what's gonna happen? Like what's gonna? It was like they had to really contemplate life at that point. So it was just such a human story. I'm not playing when I tell you it was such a human story. I love the spirit and art form of documentaries because it shows you the behind the scenes of what's really happening when someone, you know people musically or entertainment wise from the art, the completed, perfected art they put out, but it's something about watching the journey of it being created. That's the ticket for me right there. So the part that really stuck out also was the Michael Jackson section. And it wasn't a long section, but they were showing a lot of behind the scenes footage of when they were making Off the Wall, when they started Thriller, even the music video, and just how they cultivated and shaped him from going from being the Jackson 5 pop icon, little pop star, to Michael Jackson, the king of pop, rock, and soul, the man that we got to know and admire, all the way up until his untimely death. And that was brilliant because I got to watch that A&R work. I got to watch them look at his voice. He said when they were working on I can't remember if it was Off the Wall or Thriller, they listened to over 600 songs before they picked the right ones they wanted on that record. I was like, whoa, like, are you for real? Like, it was just like, what kind of catalog, He said we put a lot of things in minor third to give him more of a adult sound. Like, when we think about music and musicians and the beauty of creating an album, I know now people just put singles out. People don't spend time with the whole creative art album anymore. But putting that work together, and even just having the notion of, we're going to put you in this pocket of the minor third because it's going to give you a more adult, rich sound. It's going to make your voice, your timbre stand out even more. That is such dedication and diligence and beauty. And that's what I love about producers and arrangers. You have your vocalists, you have your artists, but then you have all those writers, you have your composer and your producer. Those are the ones that put the project together, put the sound, the quality of the music, what's going to happen in that space, and then that, what you've captured, lasts a lifetime, even past the person who put the work out, their life. So I just thought that was amazing. The other part I loved was when he talked about Sinatra. it was that part was so beautiful to me, because once again, I'm 37, so my experience with Frank Sinatra is him in the later years, not him in the earlier years. So they started showing pockets of, you know, just certain things, what their time was like together, what their creation was like, when he would like take a cue, and you know, and you know, they're doing those. It was just like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. And you know, I remember the end of Sammy Davis Jr.'s life, but to hear the stories that Quincy Jones talked about, he was there. It's not history. It's not a history book. That was his life. Ray Charles and him were like, you know, the best of, you know, they were so close. And then he said Frank Sinatra kind of ended a lot of the segregation issues in Vegas, because they would have to they could play at some of the places, but they couldn't sleep in the places, they couldn't play in the casinos, they'd have to go to the other side of town. And he was like, look, if I can't have my band, y'all not getting me. And so you can only imagine what that looked like, you know. So I just thought that was so amazing. There was even a part in there right before Tupac and Biggie died, where Quincy Jones rallied all of our hip hop artists and our youth. I want to say it was like probably during like the 94, 95 ish. I was probably like 14, 15. So I do remember that time frame. Well, yeah. And he was basically trying to get a stop the violence type thing going on. And they were able just to have like a symposium type thing where they talked, and you saw so many people in that audience. I think it was the DJ Quick, Ice Cube. Just everybody was young at the time though, but it was so moving to see that, like seeing the father. It was almost like seeing the generation ahead pulling the generation under, saying, look, we are going to stay alive, we're going to make it. And knowing Quincy Jones's story in Chicago, where I think he was showing Dr. Dre when he got stabbed by an ice pick, like in his hand, and then somebody punched him in the face at one point, and he was like 7 because he went on the wrong side of town, or he was in one area of town, and how he had to run numbers for certain people. It was just hearing all of that once again, that American story, understanding why his drive was so, just a strong drive and a strong work ethic. So that was really, really, really big. He's a family man. And I thought that was really nice too, to see him, his children. He even talked about all of his marriages, and talked about the good and also how they ended. And it's always good to hear the human story, you know, what happens, how does it happen? And it was kind of the same saga on each story. He worked too hard, as they were saying. He just worked. He loved them, but he worked. And I could understand that. I think Peggy Lipton was talking about, when he was doing The Color Purple, how he just immersed his whole essence into that movie, and she said that kind of crippled their marriage. And even though we have the brilliancy and the beautifulness of that story, it's like, oh wow, you know, dang, because you could see they really loved each other. And even now I can tell they still love each other from what I saw in the little video when she was at their Christmas party. I was like, they still love each other. So, but you know, but I understand stuff happens. You could love somebody and still stuff happens. So I just thought it was brilliant. It was so beautiful. It was such a beautiful, beautiful presentation. If you have not seen it, I really recommend that you go online on Netflix and see it while it is still there. They even showed him being able to see the African American Museum before it opened. And one thing that he talked about, because they had a picture of everybody up to you know, they had like Ray Charles, Miles Davis, they had was it Ella? I think Ella Fitzgerald. It's just different people that we have seen, but they're no longer with us. And he said, I know to some people seeing this is history, but for me, I knew these people and they're not even here. I thought that was just like, wow. Like, when you process that timeline, when you process that, that's when some things start hitting home, like, you know, just the history. They even showed a clip of him when he went back to his old house, and just watching him have that experience, it was just like you saw the humanity of his experience. And one thing he kept saying was, it just seemed so much bigger when I was younger. And that does happen. Like, I know there's been times where I've either gone back to visit a church that I used to go to when I was little, or the houses that I grew up in, we no longer have anymore. But just seeing certain elements, you're like, man, I remember this space feeling so much bigger when I was younger. And now that I'm a grown up, now that I've had life experiences, now that I'm putting it all, it's like all the pieces of the story that are fuzzy or vague come together. And so that was something that I really picked up on too. And just, once again, it just hit home. It just, I felt so warm watching that piece. And so I was so grateful that they did that. One thing I want to talk about was my experience with I believe it was back on the block. I remember when that album came out, and when I say that, you know, I remember playing that tape over and over again. Tevin Campbell was like kind of introduced in that Secret Garden where they had El DeBarge, and someone said that song was originally written for Michael, and then he didn't want to do it, so they had Barry White, El DeBarge, who else was on that track? I'm thinking of all the voices I remember, but it just so much, and how he mixed the different genres. Like Big Daddy Kane was on that piece at one point, and then Miles Davis is playing on. It's just, that was such an interesting weaving of the time at that time, just where we were, and I think that was 87, 88 to where we are now, 30 some odd years later. So if you have an opportunity, go check it out. Check out the music, listen to both his music, and then also listen to the artists he worked with. I love when I hear a song and I'll be like, that's a Quincy Jones song, because people have signatures. You can hear it. And even I like hearing him talk. Yeah, man. You know, that it was just awesome. I think at the beginning of this year, he released that really, it's not so much that it was a funny article, but that article where he just let it all out. I thought that was really cool too. You know, me as a 37-year-old woman, I love listening to our elders speak and tell stories about their life and how they just, I don't got a care in the world. I don't care who this offends. I don't care how it's said. I'm just going to say it, you know, you know, and it was such a rich well of information. So if you have time, check that article out too, that he put out. But yeah, go check it out. I'm Chanell J. Wilson. If you enjoyed this, please like, comment, subscribe. Let's have a dialogue, and I will definitely be back for more. Have a good one. Bye-bye.